There is a specific kind of pain that has no name in most languages. It is not grief, because the person is still alive. It is not anger, because you don't hate them. It is not loneliness because you know other people. It is the pain of being attached to someone your own reason tells you to release. You've had the conversations, you've made the decisions. You've told yourself 100 times that you are done, and yet, every morning they are the first thought. Every silence fills with their voice. Every ordinary moment becomes evidence of their absence. The mind knows, but something deeper doesn't listen. The ancient Stoics called this the gap between judgment and impulse, the distance between what we know and what we feel, and 2,000 years ago they wrote the exact instructions for crossing it. This video is those instructions. Before we talk about how to detach, we need to be honest about why it's so hard, because most advice on this subject is dangerously shallow. Just stop thinking about them. Focus on yourself. Time heals everything. You already know this, and you already know that knowing it changes almost nothing. So why doesn't it work? Marcus Aurelius, in his private journals, the Meditations, a book never meant to be published, never meant to be read by anyone except himself, wrote this: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Simple, almost too simple. But Marcus wasn't writing that as inspiration. He was writing it as a reminder, because he kept forgetting it. He was emperor of Rome. He lost children. He had a difficult marriage. He watched people he trusted betray him. He wrote that line not as a man who had mastered detachment, but as a man who was struggling with attachment every single day. And that is the first thing the Stoics want you to understand. Attachment is not a character flaw. It is a feature of being human. Epictetus, the former slave who became one of the greatest philosophers in history, taught that human beings are, by nature, relational creatures. We are built to bond. The nervous system physically encodes connection. The brain creates neural pathways around people. We love that function almost, identically to addiction pathways. This is not poetry. This is neuroscience that confirms what Epictetus observed with naked eyes 2 millennia ago. He wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." Read that slowly. He is not saying don't feel. He is not saying become cold. He is making a surgical distinction between what happens and what we demand happen. The suffering of attachment is almost never just about the person. It is about the story we have built around them, the future we imagined, the version of ourselves we became in their presence, the identity we constructed that has them at the center. When we lose someone, we don't just lose them. We lose a whole architecture of self. And this is why just move on fails every time. You cannot demolish an architecture by ignoring it. You have to understand how it was built, brick by brick, before you can dismantle it cleanly. That is exactly what this video is going to do. We are going to go through the Stoic method, step by step, in the actual order Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca practiced it, not as philosophy lecture, as practical, usable technique. But first, one important question. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it. Who are you trying to detach from? Not their name, but their role in your internal world. Are they someone who hurt you, and you can't stop replaying the wound? Are they someone you loved deeply, and the love didn't end when the relationship did? Are they someone who is still present in your life, but the attachment is poisoning you? Hold that answer, because the Stoic method addresses all three differently. Drop that person's initial in the comments right now. Just the initial. You don't owe anyone the whole story. But naming it, even anonymously, is the first act of acknowledgement that the Stoics say is non-negotiable. Seneca, Rome's greatest essayist, a man who lost fortunes, survived exile, watched friends die, and ultimately faced his own forced death with calm, wrote something in one of his letters that most people read past without realizing what it contains. He wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." 5 words that contain an entire philosophy of attachment. Let's break this apart. When you are attached to someone, really attached, the kind that won't let go even when reason screams at you, what exactly are you attached to? The Stoics say you are attached to a mental object, not a person. This sounds cold at first. Stay with it. The person in your mind, the one you replay conversations with, the one you imagine reconciling with, the one you grieve in is a construction. It is built from your memories, your projections, your hopes, your fears, your interpretations of their behavior. It is not them. It is your version of them, and your version of them lives entirely inside you. Marcus Aurelius was precise about this. He wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." Now apply that to the person you can't release. Every memory you carry, it's your interpretation of what happened, filtered through your emotional state at the time, reconstructed every time you retrieve it, slightly different each time. The arguments you replay, you are playing both parts. You are writing their dialogue. You are choosing what they meant. The future you imagined with them, that never existed. That was entirely a creation of your own mind. This is not to diminish what you feel. The pain is absolutely real. But Epictetus gives us a critical distinction in the Enchiridion, perhaps the most important distinction in all of Stoic philosophy. He divides all things into two categories: things in our control, things not in our control. In our control, our thoughts, our judgments, our responses, our desires, our values. Not in our control, other people's feelings, other people's choices, outcomes, circumstances, the past, the future. Now here is where this becomes profound. Attachment is the act of placing your well-being inside the not in our control column. You have handed your emotional state to another person and then suffered when they don't hold it the way you need them to. This isn't blame. Everyone does this. It is built into how bonding works. But recognizing it is the beginning of reclaiming yourself. Seneca pushes this further in his essay on the happy life. He argues that most human misery comes from a single error, confusing preference with necessity. We say, "I need this person," but what we usually mean is, "I strongly prefer this person." The distinction is not semantic. It is the difference between a wound and a choice. A necessity is something you cannot survive without. A preference is something you have allowed to feel like a necessity through repetition, through narrative, through the story you've told yourself about who you are without them. The Stoic project of detachment is not about caring less. It is about caring accurately, about reclaiming the capacity to want something without being enslaved to it. Epictetus said it most directly. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. Not resignation, not coldness, accurate allocation of attention and energy. And before we go to the actual practice, there is one more diagnostic piece the Stoics insist on. They call it fantasia, the impression. Every moment of suffering connected to another person begins with an impression. A thought arises, a memory surfaces, a scenario plays, and in the fraction of a second before you consciously engage with it, you have a choice. Epictetus calls this choice assent, whether you agree with the impression, whether you let it become the governing narrative of your moment. Most people never know this choice exists, because they were never taught to look for it. The entire Stoic practice of detachment begins at this threshold. But how do you find it? And what do you do at it? That's exactly where we're going next. Marcus Aurelius began every morning with a practice. Before the bureaucracy of empire descended on him, before the petitions, the military dispatches, the political intrigue, he sat with his journal and he examined the contents of his own mind. Not to judge them, not to suppress them, to see them clearly. He called this prosoj, attention, the sustained, deliberate observation of one's own interior life. This is the first practice for emotional detachment, not distance from the person, but clarity about your own mental movements. Here is how it works in practice. The next time a thought about this person arises, don't push it away. Don't indulge it. Don't follow it into the story. Instead, pause and ask 3 Stoic questions. Question 1. Is this thought describing reality or constructing it? Is this thought telling you something true about what is happening right now? Or is it building a scenario, a remembered past, an imagined future, a projected meaning that exists nowhere except in your mind? Most attachment thoughts are constructions. They are the mind rehearsing stories. Marcus Aurelius practiced stripping this away. He called it kata phusin, according to nature, seeing things as they actually are, bare of the interpretations we layer over them. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous and surly." This wasn't cynicism, it was preparation. He was stripping away the fantasy version of people so that the reality could be met with equanimity rather than shock. Apply the same to your attachment. Strip the person in your mind down to what is actually verifiably true. Not what you hoped, not what you feared, not what the story says, what actually happened, what they actually said, what you actually know. You may find that the person causing you the most pain is not entirely real. You are, in part, suffering from a fiction you have been authoring. Question 2. In which column does this belong? Remember Epictetus's 2 columns. For every thought about this person, ask, is this thought about something in my control or not in my control? Their feelings toward you, not in your control. Whether they change, not in your control. Whether they come back, not in your control. Your response to the thought, in your control. Your willingness to examine it, in your control. The story you choose to tell about what happened, in your control. Do this consistently, and you will notice something remarkable. The majority of the suffering is located in the not in my control column. You are burning energy on problems that are, by definition, unsolvable through direct effort. This is not defeatism, it is triage. Stop bleeding energy into the unsolvable. Redirect it toward what you can actually move. Question 3. What does this thought want from me? Every recurring thought has a function. The mind doesn't run idle loops without reason. Attachment thoughts are often doing one of 3 things. They are grieving, processing loss, trying to integrate an ending. They are protecting, rehearsing scenarios to stay alert to potential pain. They are addicting, seeking the neurochemical reward of the connection. Even through suffering, the Stoic approach says, identify which function is operating before you respond. A grief thought deserves acknowledgement. It doesn't deserve suppression. A protective thought deserves evaluation. Then a decision. Is this protection still necessary? An addictive thought deserves disruption. Because it is not serving you. It is serving the attachment itself. Epictetus trained his students to sit at this threshold, the moment between impression and response, then practice pausing. Just pausing. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The modern world has made this space almost impossible to inhabit. We are trained by every algorithm, every notification, every social platform to react immediately. Detachment requires that you reclaim this space. It will feel unnatural at first. That is expected. Marcus Aurelius struggled with it. He wrote to himself, "You have seen those things. Look also at these." He was coaching himself to redirect attention in real time, in his own journal. If the Emperor of Rome needed to practice this repeatedly, so do you, and so do I. The practice is not mastery, it is return. Returning to the space, again and again, every time you find yourself lost in the story. That is the first practice. But examination alone is not enough, because there is a second layer, one that most people never reach. And it is arguably the most powerful thing the Stoics ever taught. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy that sounds, at first encounter, almost offensive. Amor fati, love of fate. Not acceptance of fate, not tolerance of fate, love of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." He was describing the Stoic relationship to adversity. But before we get to love, we have to go through something harder. The Stoics begin with acknowledgement of what has actually been lost. Because one of the most common errors in modern detachment advice is the instruction to minimize the loss. There are other people out there. You'll find someone better. It wasn't meant to be. The Stoics would consider this disrespectful to yourself and to what was real. Seneca wrote about grief with a tenderness that surprises people who expect Stoicism to be emotionally barren. In his letter to Marcia on consolation, written to a woman grieving her son, he says, "Nature requires from us some sorrow, while more than that is the result of vanity." He is not saying don't grieve. He is making a surgical distinction between natural grief, which is proportionate, honest and necessary, and excessive grief, which has become a performance, or an addiction, or a refusal to continue living. He says, grieve fully, but grieve honestly. Ask yourself, am I grieving the actual person, or am I grieving the loss of what I wanted them to be? The loss of the future I constructed, the loss of the identity I wore in relation to them. Marcus Aurelius used a practice he called negative visualization, the deliberate imagination of loss before it occurs, or the honest acknowledgement of loss after it has. He wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." This is Amor fati at work. He is not denying the reality of loss. He is reframing the category. Loss is not a deviation from the natural order. Loss is the natural order. Everything is temporary. Every connection has an endpoint, whether through choice, distance, or death. The attachment you are suffering from was always going to end, not because it wasn't real, but because everything real exists in time, and time moves in one direction. Now here is where the Stoics make their most radical claim. They say, the loss itself can become the teacher. Epictetus, a man who was literally enslaved, who had no control over his circumstances for years of his life, argued that the things that break us are the things that reveal us. He said, seek not the good in external things, seek it in yourself. What does this mean in the context of attachment? It means the person you cannot release has been functioning as an external location for something that must eventually be found internally. Validation, safety, meaning, identity, home. These are not things another person can provide for you. They can accompany you in them, but they cannot be their source. The loss, painful as it is the removal of a proxy. And the question that loss is asking, if you are willing to hear it, is, where inside yourself have you never learned to feel at home? That is the wound beneath the wound. That is what the attachment has been covering. And that is what detachment, real detachment, Stoic detachment, gives you access to. Amor fati is not the instruction to immediately love what hurts. It is the gradual, deliberate practice of asking, what is this loss asking me to develop? Not what it has taken, what it is demanding you grow. Marcus Aurelius did this in the most human of circumstances. He lost multiple children. He lost trusted friends to betrayal. He lost years of his life to warfare he didn't choose. And his journals, his private, unguarded journals, show a man who went through real grief, real anger, real exhaustion, but who returned again and again to the same question. What is required of me now? Not, why is this happening to me? What is required of me now? That shift, from victimhood to agency, from why to what now, is the beating heart of Stoic emotional detachment. If you've been carrying a loss for a long time, I want you to ask yourself that question honestly, not in a way that bypasses the grief. After the grief, what is this asking you to develop? Write your answer in the comments if you're willing. That single act of articulation is more powerful than you know. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy that rarely gets discussed in the popular conversation about Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, oikeosis, usually translated as appropriation or affiliation. It describes the Stoic understanding of how a person comes into right relationship with themselves, and it is the foundation of everything we've discussed, because real detachment is not primarily away from something. Real detachment is toward yourself. Let me explain what that means. When we become deeply attached to another person, especially over a long period, something subtle happens to the self. We begin to define ourselves relationally. I am the person who loves them. I am the person they chose. I am the person who is incomplete without them. Our habits form around them, our schedule, our vocabulary, the way we describe our days, even the way we eat, sleep, and move through the world. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Most people experiencing attachment pain have lost the answer to the first part of that sentence. They have not said to themselves what they would be. They have said, "I would be the person in that relationship." And when the relationship ended, or became toxic, or became impossible, the self lost its architecture. This is not weakness. This is what deep connection does. But the Stoic path back is not through grief alone. It is through deliberate self-reconstruction, and Stoicism gives us the framework. The Stoics teach that the self has a natural home, a set of values, capacities, and ways of moving through the world that belong to it, independently of any relationship. Not a self that is closed to others, not a self that is defended against connection, a self that is rooted, that can bend in relationship without being uprooted by the end of one. Rebuilding this rooted self is the third practice of detachment, and it has 3 movements. Movement 1, recovering your values independent of them. Ask yourself, what did you believe before this person arrived in your life? What mattered to you? What made you angry or moved you or gave you a sense of purpose? Those things did not disappear. They were layered over. Marcus Aurelius returned to his values constantly in the Meditations. He would write, "This is what I value. This is who I am. This is what I will not compromise." Not as arrogance, as reclamation, as the act of remembering himself against the pressure of empire. You need to do the same against the pressure of loss. Write down 5 things you valued before this person. 5 things that were true about you that had nothing to do with them. This is not a self-help exercise. This is Stoic prosos, the return of attention to what is actually yours. Movement 2, recovering your capacity for virtue as the source of meaning. The Stoics are very specific about this. They say virtue, courage, wisdom, justice, temperance is the only thing that constitutes genuine human flourishing. Not relationships, not outcomes, not the approval or presence of any other person. This is a radical claim, and in the moment of deep attachment pain, it can feel cold, even cruel. But Epictetus doesn't mean that relationships don't matter. He means if you're flourishing, your sense that your life is going well depends entirely on the presence of another person. You are not flourishing. You are dependent. And dependence, the Stoics say, is not love. It is a form of fear wearing love's clothing. Real love, in the Stoic sense, is offered freely from a person who is already whole, not extracted desperately from a person who needs the other to complete them. The path of detachment is therefore also the path toward becoming capable of better love. Movement 3, the deliberate return to action. Seneca wrote, "While we are postponing, life speeds by." This is perhaps the most practical piece of Stoic wisdom on detachment. At some point, the internal work must express itself externally. Not distraction, not keeping busy, purposeful re-engagement with your own life. Marcus Aurelius, even in his grief, continued to govern, continued to write, continued to train, continued to serve. Not because he was suppressing his pain, but because he understood that action in accordance with your values is its own form of healing. When you are acting as the person your values describe, when you are doing meaningful work, maintaining your body, spending time with people who see you clearly, you are not avoiding the loss. You are living past it. And eventually the living past it becomes the life itself. I want to stay with one specific situation because I know it is the reason many of you are here. Not detachment from someone who hurt you, not detachment from a toxic relationship, detachment from someone you still love, someone who, by every measure of your heart, you would still choose, if choosing were possible. This is the hardest case, and the Stoics do not pretend otherwise. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius after a painful loss, says something extraordinary. He says, "I shall not be ashamed to confess that I loved this man, and that I still love him." He does not say he has stopped. He does not say detachment has erased the feeling. He says he loved him. Past tense of circumstance, not of feeling, and he continues to live fully anyway. This is the Stoic distinction that changes everything. Detachment is not the end of love. It is the transformation of love from a grasping, desperate, self-consuming attachment into something that can coexist with reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." Notice with all your heart, not half-heartedly, not defensively, not with one eye on the exit. The Stoics were not emotional cowards. They loved fully, and they lost fully, and they continued fully. The goal is not to feel less. The goal is to stop requiring a specific outcome from what you feel. You can love someone and accept that the relationship is over. You can love someone and know that returning to them would cause harm, to you, to them, to both. You can love someone and not act on it, not because the love is fake, but because you have other values that matter. Epictetus says the highest form of human freedom is not the absence of attachment. It is the capacity to choose how you relate to what you feel. The feeling is not the problem. The demand attached to the feeling is the problem. Love without demand is a very different experience than love with demand. Demand says, "I need you to be here, to be this, to give me this." Love without demand says, "I hold genuine care for you, and I also hold genuine care for my own integrity, my own life, my own path." Both can coexist. That coexistence, the holding of love and release simultaneously, is what the Stoics call apatheia, not apathy, not coldness. Freedom from the compulsion to act on every feeling, the capacity to feel fully and choose wisely. That is the destination of this work. Everything we've discussed is meaningless without practice. So let me give you a concrete daily structure, rooted entirely in what Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca actually did. Morning, the Stoic preparation. Before you reach for your phone, before the day makes its demands, sit for 5 minutes and do 3 things. First, identify the one most likely emotional disturbance today. Is it the chance you'll see them? A reminder? A thought pattern you've been running? Name it in advance. Second, return to your values. Name them aloud or in writing. I am a person who values clarity, honesty, growth, contribution. Whatever is true for you, say it before the day begins. Third, the memento mori moment. Remind yourself, gently, not morbidly, that this day is finite. This life is finite. The amount of it you spend in compulsive attachment loops is a choice. Marcus Aurelius did this every morning, not once, every morning. Midday, the Stoic pause. When the thought arises, and it will, use the 3 questions from section 3. Is this thought describing reality or constructing it? Which column does this belong in? What does this thought want from me? Do not aim for perfection. Aim for the attempt to pause. That is the entire practice. Evening, the Stoic review. Epictetus recommended this, and Seneca wrote about it extensively. Before sleep, review the day in 3 questions. Where did I act in accordance with my values? Where did I give control to something outside my control? What do I want to do differently tomorrow? Not as self-punishment, as honest accounting. Seneca wrote, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day, going through what I have done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by." That is the practice. Consistent, honest, private self-examination. Not to achieve perfection. To move, slowly but reliably, toward a self that is less at the mercy of what it cannot control. Epictetus, the man who began his life as a slave, was once asked what freedom meant to him. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself. Not master of circumstances, not master of outcomes, not master of other people's hearts, master of himself." This is what emotional detachment ultimately offers, not the absence of feeling, Not the guarantee that you will never love and lose again, but the growing capacity to move through the interior landscape of your own life without being permanently enslaved to any single feature of it. The person you are working to detach from, they are not the enemy of your peace. Your demand that they be different than they are is the source of the suffering. Release the demand, not the care, not the history, not the humanity of what you shared. Release the demand, and in that release, perhaps gradually, perhaps suddenly, perhaps in a moment you won't even recognize until later, you will find yourself standing on ground that belongs to you, ground that was always there, ground that no one can remove. Marcus Aurelius, near the end of the Meditations, writes to himself, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." I'll offer you the same invitation in this context. Waste no more time arguing with yourself about whether you should be over this by now, whether you're too sensitive, whether you've grieved too long, whether you should be stronger. Just begin the practice. Return to the space. Name the thought. Identify the column. Do what your values require. Again and again and again. That is the Stoic path. Not a transformation that happens once, a return that happens daily. For as long as you are alive, and that, Marcus Aurelius would tell you, is more than enough. If this video reached something real in you, if even one of these ideas landed, then there is one thing I ask. Share it, not for the channel, for the person you know who is quietly carrying exactly this kind of weight right now and hasn't said it out loud. The comment section is yours. Drop your reflection. Drop what you're working through. This is a space built for exactly that. Subscribe if you want to go deeper into this tradition. There are thousands of years of wisdom left to excavate, and we're just getting started. Until next time, guard your inner world. It is the only territory that has ever truly been yours.